Hello and welcome to Potholes Politics, Maine Municipal Association's podcast covering local Maine issues from A to Z. I am Nick Kimball and I am an underwriting technician with MMA's Risk Management Services. Like many of my colleagues here at MMA, I am also a member and not just an employee working on behalf of the municipalities. I am a firefighter with the Randolph Fire Department, serve on 2 municipal boards in my town, and I'm also the vice president of the Randolph Fire Association. Or, as the podcast host Rebecca likes to say, I'm a basement saver. But that's just because she's secretly always really wanted to be a firefighter.
It's so true.
I know it is. Staff at MMA believe in service to our communities, and because many of us also serve our home municipalities, we understand the importance of the tasks facing municipal officials and staff as well. We also understand the importance of our intergovernmental partnerships. And in this week's episode, we will highlight just one of those important partnerships between state and local government. We hope you stay tuned for this week's episode. Here's Neil and Rebecca.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Potholes Politics. This is episode 3. I'm quite excited about this topic. Would you mind introducing us to this theme today of effective state and local partnerships?
Yeah, Neil, I am really excited too about it because it gives us an opportunity to talk about a partnership that works really, really well. And because it does so, and because of where it sits within the municipal relationship, it's almost entirely invisible. Very infrequently has a spotlight put on it, but it is there and available consistently. And that is the state and local partnership between law enforcement, Department of Public Safety, and municipal police. And it is not only there in times of crisis or on a daily basis, like when we think about things like the crime lab that's available to communities to process evidence that you couldn't replicate on the local level, or the use of the data systems to query background checks and criminal records and whether or not someone is licensed or has a registered vehicle. It's not just those systems that are part of every day, but there are other important ways in which local communities develop those community-based relationships that not only help with larger state investigations, but also state very specialized services that benefit from a broad geographic area of experience, allow them to gain skills and stay proficient in specific ways that, again, would not be replicatable on the local level.
The quintessential example of the state providing expertise where local capacity really doesn't and can't exist.
And isn't best suited for that. It's very challenging to kind of be all things to all people at all times. And communities are really clear about what they want from their municipal police. They have the ability to specifically meet with their leadership on a regular basis. You can walk in and have coffee with any police chief, I think probably in the state. It's pretty much a staple. But when you're looking at a statewide entity that actually hasn't added to its patrol ranks anyways in almost 30 years, there's not necessarily the resources or the time in any one specific location that allows you to get really deep into a larger community relationship. But the bigger community that you are there to support and can support most certainly are law enforcement communities in which you most closely work with. And they play a really important vital role in supporting all local police. It's important that that role is maintained, but there's also impacts. Their specialties and their ability to respond can be impacted by policy decisions that adversely affect their availability for local law enforcement for those specialties. And likewise, some of the pressures on local law enforcement or closing of a local law enforcement agency has some significant impacts and effects on those other state level agencies as well. And rarely does the person who is receiving those services understand what those implications are until they're needed. They don't really have an opportunity to proactively think about what level of response they want in some really specific emergencies that aren't always foreseen until they're needed.
You put it perfectly. So often police departments are that service you never think about until you need them. To use the term that we were just talking about, this episode is really going to highlight the invisible blue line, the state and local partnership. I believe you had a great conversation about Maine Day. What is Maine Day?
Yeah, Maine Day is pretty important to the University of Maine at Orono system, in which they combine a Maine Day of service for the individuals that are on campus, along with a Maine Day of giving and philanthropy for the university to help support their operations. It started as a way of sprucing up and providing a service to the community just before graduation. So it's not only sprucing up and making the campus lovely, it's sprucing up the local community as well. So it was really established on this service model. But the university has grown over time, and the realities of housing, how that housing is situated, where it is situated, and the impacts on the neighboring communities has changed pretty significantly. So it's gone from maybe what it was originally intended into some areas that might otherwise pose a significant burden on the community, and maybe not necessarily in the spirit of it was originally envisioned by. But as you do within all municipal government, you just get it done and you try to address that. And this particular partnership represents one way in which that invisible blue line, the structures that we have between the state and local law enforcement agencies, are not only really important and vital, they provide very different levels of services with very different outcomes and goals and abilities. And those are really important and available consistently. It's a very different conversation than some of the conversations that we tend to hear that are driven by national narratives. Because of that invisibility and because it works, that I think that this was a really great conversation to not necessarily look about a crisis response, but look at what ways these groups work together on a regular basis to provide service to our citizens, including public safety, and how they support each other symbiotically and do exactly the types of roles within their communities that most people would like them to do.
It's going to make for a good case study. And so without further ado.
Yeah, I started by having them introduce themselves, my assembled group of rock stars from Orono.
My name is Sophie Wilson. I'm the town manager in Orono. Been here for approximately 11 years. For those who are not aware, the town of Orono is a community of about 11,000 people that proudly hosts the University of Maine's flagship campus.
I want to first thank you, Rebecca, for inviting us onto the podcast, inviting myself and the other members of the panel. My name is Dan Merrill. I'm the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the Orono Police Department, and I've been with the Orono Police Department coming up on 14 years now. It's a new role for me as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer since November, so I'm still learning the role a little bit, but excited and learning a lot of new things.
That's great. Have you always been at Orono PD, or did you work for any other agency all 14 years at Orono?
I have been here for 14 years. While I was finishing up my college, I actually worked a year part-time for Hamden.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So while I was still in school, I worked part-time during my junior year for them for a year.
Thank you. Yes, Scott Goslin. I'm the major with the Maine State Police for support services. So the way the Maine State Police is set up, there are two distinct divisions. One is operations, where Major Ross is in charge of operations, and there's support services is the other one, and that's the one that I work with. Support services are things like the crime lab, computer crimes unit, traffic safety unit, the MIAC, and the specialty teams are just some of those specialty units that are part of this division. And which is why I'm here today. And of course, Darren is here today as the commander of one of those specialty teams. But yes, so with the Maine State Police, major for support services.
Yeah, Sergeant Darren Foster, the Maine State Police, been on the department for 25 years. My day job, I run our crash analysis unit in the traffic division, and I'm also the incident management assistance team commander. I've been on that team since it started back in 2007.
Thank you, Rebecca. My name is Bill Ross, and I run the operations division within the state police. That's the patrol troops throughout the entire states. When each troop barracks would fall under my command. In addition to that would be the 3 major crimes divisions throughout the state, and also the commercial vehicle enforcement throughout the state. Been with the state police just over 20 years, and look forward to today.
Hey, good morning. So I'm John Cody. I'm the chief of the state police. I started my career as a patrol deputy in Aroostook County, and later I was a patrolman in the town of Millinocket, and I've been with the state police for 33 years.
Well, thank you all. Colonel Cody, MSP has a lot of specialized response teams that provide support for municipalities, and not only your own agency, but also some regional cooperation, I believe. But in particular, around Maine days was the use of a couple or a few key teams, incident management assistance and the crowd management and traffic safety teams, from planning to completion. How much staff time and planning go into support for something like that on the day?
I think, and I can let Sergeant Foster get into the deeper part of it, but I think we have a system designed through our incident management assistance team that largely is kind of scalable. And really, probably for the first couple sessions of Maine Day, that pre-planning was quite a bit of work, and figuring out, the system design, which parties needed to be part of the unified command, and how that day would go. And then once that system has been implemented and deemed successful, I think you work with the local authorities to find out what are they hearing about the event this year, or the things that are different as far as size or content or attendance. And then you scale that response and those resources accordingly. But hopefully, with subsequent events, the prep time is reduced, because it's kind of something you set on the shelf and pull it off as you need it, rather than starting from a blank piece of paper every time. But I think Sergeant Foster certainly can get more into the aspect of what it takes each year now to prepare.
Sure. So like the Colonel said, yeah, the initial year that we started getting involved, it was a fairly big lift for the team. It was right in the middle of COVID season. So we actually weren't sure what type of crowd response we were going to get, if it was going to be minimal or if it was going to be the big release, because it was kind of as COVID was breaking out, or hopefully what we thought back then was almost over. So we didn't know if it was going to be the students freely releasing, and it was their first real get together after COVID. So we spent a lot of time just working with all the agencies, all the partners, just to see what all the needs were. One of the biggest issues that we come across with is communications, because we have multiple agencies with different radio frequencies and different methodologies. So one of the things that our team does is try to be that liaison for everyone, to bring everyone together on the same platform and work seamlessly. So there was a lot of man hours initially, but like the Colonel said, in our second year when we were there, we were able to take that plan. We had an after action review. We saw what worked, what didn't work. So in our second year, we were able to focus on what didn't work the first time, just change the plan up a little bit, change the dates, add some names, and march on. So it was much less work the second year around. We had 16 members from our incident management team on site to assist.
For this year?
Yes.
There were 2 other teams too, the crowd management team and the traffic safety team. Was that part of them? Was that all total 16, or was that just the incident management team?
So 6 for incident management team. For IMAT, there were 6 of us. And then there was a traffic safety enforcement team there. and the crowd management team as well. And that's a full team. So I'll let the colonel, if he wants to get into numbers on that. But there were 6 for IMAC.
I guess this question could be for either one of you. Can you share how much time and effort goes into keeping those special response teams trained and proficient, and not only to address traditional threats, but also emerging threats and new information?
Sure. I think it's a unique situation in Maine that almost all of our people that serve in these specialties have other primary roles. They serve as detectives or troopers. Their activity in a specialty team is above and beyond that. And so a lot of times that lends itself to show their determination and commitment to that team as well. So generally, most specialty teams have at least a couple days of training each month, or they might do 3 days every other month, but it is regular training. And normally our team commanders are keeping up to speed and up to date on best practices nationally. They certainly have strong commitments and relationships within our several New England State Police partners through a affiliation called the New England State Police Administrators Conference, which allows us to share resources, to combine training, to establish training standards for teams to meet. And that's a big part of it. And it is, the important work that those teams do. They need to remain proficient in those skills. And, beyond calls for service, the training is an important part of that, always assessing, are we still following best practices, and what role are we asked for? And I think that's the one thing that we keep in mind is just regular dialogue with our local and county partners of, what role does their community need the state police to play? So you can imagine a conversation in Cumberland County and the expectation and role of the state police would be very different compared to like Aroostook and Washington County. And again, even in the smaller communities, we're seeing several communities eliminate or curtail operations of local police departments that have been in place for many years. So we need to work with them to determine exactly what we can do to assist them, what we can't do, what's beyond our capacity, and certainly partner with our county partners to determine, hey, collectively, can we come alongside these communities? So I think that's what we look for. We look to say, hey, do we have enough canine units out there? Hey, how many calls for service did a certain team have last year? And are we really the sole agency that's equipped to respond to that? And I'll use, when you have a series of bomb threats that may hit several communities some morning, we're really the go-to agency, and that response and that specialty response really falls to us. So those are the conversations that help us determine, how big do we make these teams? What role and do we expand their role and their memberships? But it certainly is a commitment by us and a commitment by our people to put that time and effort in to maintain those skills and to kind of be, that safety net for agencies so that that's not a skill set or a resource that they need to try and create on their own.
Yeah, that brings up a good point too about that local relationship as well. How important is local knowledge when you're looking at trying to plan something of that scale or even respond in the moment?
Yeah, we see that a lot with our major crimes units when a community has a homicide. By statute, that homicide falls to the state police responsibility. But certainly the insight about the background of the people that are involved in this case and what may have led to this, it's those local connections that are going to know their community, know the best sources and of information, things like that. And it's no different in major events. We work with them, our Fusion Center, our MIAC can always kind of try and see what's out for open source information about, maybe groups that are coming to an event to either demonstrate or otherwise attend. That might be new this year. We try and share that with the local agency to see what their resources are and what they need. But those conversations are very important. And we need to know and have that understanding of what are they seeking for us to do and come alongside and support them the best we can.
So your team members all have other jobs. How hard is that for the agency to balance when someone may have already put in 40 hours for the week?
Yeah, that's a common question we have because staffing for us right now is difficult, much like any other agency. And there are times when, someone maybe has been to a specialty call that has gone on for several hours, sometimes over 20 hours. and they need rest and they need to refresh themselves, and yet they're supposed to be patrolling that day. So it does mean that a lot of times we may have to fill an overtime shift or have people make that adjustment. So it is a huge commitment, and I think it just shows the dedication of our people to make it work. But I can let Sergeant Foster talk a little bit, because I know he's a guy that has a busy day job, and it's very common for these late night calls to come in, and he can probably talk more about his efforts to try and balance the needs of specialty reconstruction response when you're pulling from the field.
Yeah. So like the Colonel said, for the most part, all of our specialty team commanders all of our specialty team members have day jobs. For me, I run our crash unit. So it involves going to all the fatal crashes. And in fact, when I get off this call, outside of crash investigation, there was a robbery in Fairfield, and I'm also head of the drone team, so I'm going to go look for evidence to assist Fairfield PD. And so it branches off into multiple things throughout the day that ultimately come down to our responsibilities, but it's just a matter of prioritizing what needs to be done right now. And sometimes there's a little bit lack of sleep, and sometimes somebody else has to come along and pick up some slack if you're involved in your specialty for an extended period of time. But I think as a department as a whole, we do a pretty good job of managing our people and trying to spread that workload around.
Speaking of staffing and sleepless nights, this question is for DC Merrill. How important is this MSP relationship and this specialty team support for Orono in terms of staffing an event like this, but also in being able to address certain things that are happening within the community?
One of the things that stands out the most to us in Orono, being a small community, is the relationships that the Colonel spoke about that we have on the local level with our local troop commanders, and the relationships that we've built with the state polices and the supervisors in these specialty teams, to be able to know that they're just a phone call or an email away. I know that in the last 2 years, like Sergeant Foster alluded to, in 2021 was when we really started to come into more of a unified command approach to Maine Day. So that was kind of our first year, learned a lot of things from that. This past year in 2022, I think we built that out, and it was just as simple as ahead of the event, about a month or so ahead of the event, I just had to send an email to who I knew was the supervisor in charge of the crowd management team. And he got right back to me, and we started those meetings right away. And we were able to pretty much pick up where we left off last year and build out a little bit of a better plan based off the after action reports and go from there and make the day a success. So it's those relationships and those rapports that we have that are what make these events successful. Could Orono survive and get by Maine Day on our own? Yes, but I know, having done this for several years, that there would be a reduction in service that we'd be able to provide to the rest of our community if we were doing it on our own. At the time of Maine Day this year, I was probably short 3 or 4 full-time staff people, and I only have a staff of 15. So just like the Colonel already spoke about, staffing is an issue. And we are a 24-hour community, just like anything else, because we're a municipality. So I don't only have to run the events of Maine Day, I have to run shifts for 24 hours ahead of Maine Day, shifts for all day on Maine Day, and then shifts for the day after Maine Day. So I have to do the same thing the Colonel was speaking about, of trying to cover and provide the needs of the services to the town while providing a safe environment for a day that we knew would happen, be a success also. And that was where the state police was a huge asset, because they were able to bring in a bunch of resources that helped us fill some of those manning issues that we had, staffing issues.
That's a great point, because the public safety needs for the community don't go away simply because there's a big event going on.
No, definitely not.
So this event has changed over time in your experience as well.
Yes. So in December, it'll be about 14 years that I've been here in the town of Orono. There's been some changes in the culture of what Maine Day is in Orono. And we're working on every year, we're working on trying to bring it back to more of what it was originally intended to be, which is a community service, day of philanthropy, clean up the town and make it look better the week ahead of graduation. So it has not been that since about 2014 or 15. It changed a little bit. We had some major complexes come into town, and that changes the ability for large groups of people to congregate in one place. So that's our experience, is what Maine Day always is college age people descending on one of the 3 major complexes that we have in town and getting 2,000 to 3,000 people at its peak in the middle of the day all together in a very confined space. And, it's definitely a risky event. We've been very fortunate to not have any serious injuries or issues be a outcome to this point.
So it impacts beyond just policing and external or threats or traffic. Do you have any specific concerns? I know that there's a lot of seasonality within Orono because it is a college town. What are those pressures on public safety and on your agency, and maybe some of your consistent concerns about public safety?
I think we're fortunate here in Orono in that we're not necessarily like some of the beach communities where we have an influx of students in the fall, but we're fortunate that the town's supportive of us having a staffing that is for the entire year. So I don't necessarily increase my amount of staffing. I don't bring on part-time officers or anything like that to help me out during the school year. We're allotted to have 15 full-time officers. So that's what I have for the whole year when I'm full staff. So I think one of the things that I try and tell people, even sometimes when I'm recruiting, and this is not a stick on any other agency, is that our busier times are during school years. So our calendar tends to run a little more like a school calendar in that for 9 months out of the year, we're pretty busy because our population does swell with the influx of students. It's not just students, it's staff and teachers and things like that. The University of Maine is the largest campus in the state of Maine. So it's not just the students that come to town, it's all the support staff to teach those students and host events like hockey games and football games and things like that. We're staffed the same in January as we are in September. And so we're prepared for whatever will come about throughout the course of a year.
Sophie, how important is Maine Days to the community?
That is kind of a loaded question. The University of Maine leadership, they believe that Maine Day is important to the community. And I think it ties back to that commitment when it started decades ago to philanthropy, giving back to the community. Like all of us, they struggle with staffing, and the following week after Maine Day is graduation, where everything needs to look beautiful. And this was Maine Day for the first few hours of Maine Day is about sprucing up not only campus, but in town. So I've been here 11 years. And in that time, I have seen 2 of the housing complexes be built, 2 of the 3. So one predates me. Prior to the housing complexes, Maine Day would be, you'd see groups of people, you'd see a few hundred people gathering in certain places. It was contained a lot to fraternities, parties that quite honestly are a size that Dan and his crew are well-versed and capable of managing while still providing service to the rest of the community. As the off-campus and dense student housing became more populous, we began to see waves going through neighborhoods, scaring individuals and winding up at one of the housing complexes. And it's not like a backyard party that just has 2,000 or 3,000 people at it. These are kids who are experimenting with drugs and alcohol. We're seeing funnels off roofs. We're seeing people skateboard off roofs. We're seeing people take cars and do burnouts through the middle of a complex where there are a huge gathering of people. These are unsafe gatherings. And in the past, before we got our act together, we tried to manage it on our own with local resources. And those local resources included the local contacts with the state police. And the way we managed it was when it got really bad, we would call for help and everybody would come flying into town right as my elementary school was getting out for the day and create more safety hazards, not because they were doing anything but their job, but because of the way Orono is set up. And when we figured out that we didn't have to do this alone, and that there were greater resources and that we should be relying on these collaborations, we were able to pull our officers out of those settings, which I think helped calm them down to some degree, still very dangerous, and sit back and be more strategic and tactical in our approach, which I think in many ways protected the rest of the community from some of the fallout we were seeing. Unfortunately, this year, We ran something in the neighborhood of 24 ambulance calls. We had ambulances from Orono, Old Town, Northern Light, the University of Maine running constantly. We were very fortunate to have the state police here because we also had a domestic violence call that in previous years, I have no idea when we would have been able to get to that. And that's not safe. What was most important to me this year is that with the IMAC truck, and I'm going to get it wrong and I apologize, but with the truck and all of the video that they had up, Chief Merrill and others were able to bring in humane leadership to see what was actually happening. And for the first time, we're actually seeing some traction in understanding that perhaps the way Maine Day is currently operating on campus is not the right way to do this. So my hope is that we will work together to create an alternative to Maine Day for next year. But that doesn't take anything away from the relationship that the town of Orono has with the Maine State Police. And it's not special in that every single community in the state of Maine could have this relationship. There is a misconception in our state that our law enforcement agencies are a hierarchy or duplicative. And it's not the case. I have 15 amazing officers who work really hard to understand our community and police our community the way it wants to be policed. They specialize in dealing with 18 to 24-year-olds who are experiencing life independently for the first time. I don't have staff or resources to become experts in technical things that we might see once in a while. And our relationship with the state police allows us to identify the areas that we need help with, and they have always come to the table. It's important that instead of thinking about how each local law enforcement agency should become independently resourced, that we really should be looking at how in this state we can make sure that local entities can really focus on community policing and understanding what their community needs are. And perhaps in Orono, it's a less tactical facade, which is very important for us here. So when we need tactical things, we reach out and we get help. I think one of the reasons it works so well, I feel like there is immense mutual respect. And I don't see the state police coming in and trying to take over. Even when we try to have them take over, they are really good at making it a partnership and a collaboration and understanding that we are the experts for Orono in terms of what law enforcement needs to. So long-winded answer, but.
No, Sophie, you just did my entire podcast for me, and I appreciate it. a really key point in terms of that local knowledge piece. So I'm going to kick it back to Colonel Cody and talk about how important it is for you, for those local agencies to have that community policing view and those relationships within the community in order for you to be successful in helping.
Yeah, I think that's, why we talk about we have to be kind of very agile and our ability to change and fill a role that may be different in one part of the state versus the other, because that local community ability to staff up their agency and set their priorities and their goals, and that's a role that we can't fill. We don't have the ability to meet and fine tune for every community exactly the way they would like enforcement to occur. We rely on those local partners. And again, it's a matter of knowing that a lot of the things that we build up for statewide response are just that. When we come in and assist a community for the day, we bring assets and resources and skills. And then, the Friday after Maine Day, the community of Orono does not get an invoice from the state police for those services. When a community has a bomb threat, as an example, and we bring a trooper from somewhere across the state with a bomb canine to clear that building so school can resume. Again, we pull that trooper. They're either on day off or off shift or pulled from a patrol slot, but they the commitment of our people to come when that need is there, to fill that need for whatever community has, and then head back and just get back to work. That's been a great partnership. And I agree. I think right now across the state, our partnerships at every level, whether it's state, federal, county, local, are probably the best that I've ever seen them in my time. That just I've got cell phone numbers, they have mine. We're really on a first name basis. And there's really, I think our commitment to each other throughout the state for that common goal of public safety is probably better than it's ever been.
Yeah, so it's also an intricate machine, it sounds like. And so if you're pulling one cog, you're actually kind of weakening another. So Chief Merrill, how hard would it be for you to get some sort of specialized team or even 2 days of training for a response that would be similar in ability for something like what state police offers? Could you get a drone team, for instance?
To be honest, I don't even know if it's practical or something that the town has the budget or the ability to support to the level the state police provides those services.
Yeah.
I think Colonel Cody laid out all the training requirements and all the training hours and all just the manpower it is that his agency is able to possess just because of the sheer size of his agency. So I think that's the biggest thing. I'm a small community in Maine, one of many considered to be, as far as municipalities go in law enforcement, we're an average size municipality in the amount of people that we have. And I have some very specially trained individuals for DREs or field sobriety instructors or intox instructors and things like that. I just don't have the infrastructure that the state police has to have bomb squad members or to have teams of people that come in and deal with just crowd management or things like that. Not to say we don't know how to do it. It's just not, we don't train it every day or every month like the state police's specialized units do. And I think that the colonel mentioned that well too, and Sergeant Foster alluded to it a little bit. When we call on these teams, the crowd management team and the incident management team, the IMAT team for communications, they're bringing resources from all over the state. These aren't just troopers that are coming from our local troop and Troop E. It starts with me calling the troop lieutenant and saying, hey, could we get support for this day? And Lieutenant Johnson, who's my local contact, has always been fantastic with saying, yes, whatever you guys need, we'll help you on the local level. And the same thing with Sergeant Foster and Sergeant Mishu, who's responsible for the crowd management team. It's just, it's more of a local money and me thing as much as anything. I couldn't support it. I don't have the staffing. We don't have the equipment. I don't have the building space. And to be quite honest, to have a tactical response team in the town of Orono would not be something that they would want us to have. They would want us to call the people like the state police who put the training hours in and are state certified in doing that. There's a reason why you call the Maine State Police. It's because they're very good at what they do and they train on it a lot. My cops are very good at local community thing and are very tactically sound. We just spend 2 days in tactics training, but it is not a primary function of our job day in and day out.
Well, and that's an important point too, because you're connected to your community and your community is deciding your enforcement response. They have that direct input, but that doesn't mean that there aren't threats that can come in from the outside that you don't need some sort of resource to respond to, but it might not just make sense for that investment on that local level, or just might not be even feasible.
Yeah, 100%.
I can follow up just a little bit on something that Sophie mentioned about, I think part of it has been getting beyond the idea that, hey, if you call the state police, that we're going to want to take over and run the event. And many times for us, at the end of the day, we really feel we've been successful help if the people that attended an event didn't even know the state police were there. That's kind of how we gauge a successful day and a successful event, is that we were there. And certainly we had resources staged and at the ready. But if our people went home that day and had nothing to do, that's sometimes that's the sign of the success for our team.
Yeah, I think that's a really important narrative too, because it's really hard to measure what didn't happen, but it's good that that system is there. Sophie, I'm glad that you're back on. I wanted to ask you one last question, and as the municipal official on this call, in what ways is the relationship between Department of Public Safety and municipality different than other kind of state local relationships?
Well, I think it's more personal than some others in that, Orono has lots of relationships with the Department of Transportation. This is it's voluntary, which is great. So we do it because it is effective, and we've built relationships that hopefully will stand the test of time. We also do it. This relationship is about what's best for our community. The state police doesn't come with a checkbook. We don't need that from them. What we need from them is their expertise. And, when you think about a state that has chronic financial issues, right, where property taxes are going up and income taxes are going up, and everybody wants to cut everything, and not understanding that when they cut the resource, they cut the service. And I hope that Orono presents a model of our job is to be really good at the local level, doing the local level things and building the relationship and the rapport so that there's trust and mutual respect, so that those more specialized skill sets can come in when needed and be available for other parts of the state when needed. I think it's a mistake to build something locally that we might pull off the shelf every once in a great while. It's a waste of taxpayer dollars, and it doesn't provide the same service, because when the traffic control team comes through town, it is a much different experience for my college students than when Dan is out with our one police officer doing a speed detail. We pull them out when it's necessary. We call upon them. They do wonderful work. But it's a relationship that, quite honestly, should be mirrored across other state town relationships, Rebecca. It is one where we should be helping them and they should be helping us, which we should see across the board. And I think, unfortunately, as resources constrain and people in our state look to other states for how to organize themselves, they miss the relationships and the processes and the history that already exists here, which is rich, plentiful, and should be the basis for how we organize ourselves moving forward.
Yeah, and you've just completed my podcast for me. I think you're going to be the one that's doing this from now on. This is awesome.
Absolutely not.
I think, the more we have these conversations with the right people, the better informed they become. I think the model that we have in Maine just makes sense on so many levels. Beyond just the fiscal aspect of it, it's about the important skill set that are involved in these. When that day comes and you need to tap into that resource, you're making that call and bringing that into your community. You need to have the peace of mind that these people have the right skill sets, the right attitudes, and the right capabilities to come in and help resolve the situation, not make things worse. And so I think that's our goal, is to always maintain that trust with our partners. Those, having those discussions when there's nothing specific to talk about other than just checking in and that the relationship and the communication is key. But I think it is, the more people sit and talk and learn about what we do, they realize, boy, that approach just makes so much sense for the size and diversity of our state. It's been a very successful model that we continue to be committed to, and our people and their commitment to going above and beyond what we ask them to do, and to come forward and make that additional commitment for these specialty teams allows us to do that. It certainly is not anything we could do if it required full-time staffing for these teams. We wouldn't be able to do it. So it's their willingness to live that divided attention and a commitment to their normal everyday role and the skills and abilities of these specialty teams.
Thank you all very much for being willing to do this and for entertaining me. And thanks. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
A really fascinating conversation. One thing that stood out to me was Sophie had mentioned law enforcement in Maine is really not a hierarchy of agencies and departments, which it commonly is thought of, but in fact is a delicate balance of services.
Absolutely. I think that was a really key point that's really important to think about, because it often isn't thought about until someone wants to advance a national narrative or someone has a moment of crisis. That's what I think is really important about this particular story to focus on. It illustrates the Jenga connection, like for law enforcement. So if you're pulling from one peg and you think that you're creating some sort of major change, oftentimes what you're actually doing is undermining the structure that is there, that is really important to communities. And they don't need that 24 hours a day. They might need Chief Merrill services 24 hours a day. In that one moment that they do need those extra services, they want to have services that are well-trained, that are consistently trained, that have that muscle memory, and have had a depth of experience all across Maine to feed into that make them really proficient in their job. Dan is really proficient in his job, and he is really proficient in his community. And each level of law enforcement has very particular skills that are very different from each other. It's a Jenga-like system or a delicate web in which undermining one actually has profound implications for another. And it often isn't thought about until it's needed in the time of crisis. But in this case, I think what was great about that relationship too is that it showed that there were, basically kind of some state level pressures on the town of Orono from the university system, from a community that, definitely wants to have that good relationship. Rather than creating an adversarial process, they regrouped and thought about how can we look at this differently and use our services more wisely and create these partnerships. And the consistent partnership that exists between law enforcement was already willing and there and well structured to do that, and does it on a regular basis. We just don't think about it and we just don't talk about it. And that whole process collected information that then will allow the other half of the state relationship to be able to go down at the university and reevaluate how they approach that and shift back to that original focus of what was important about giving back to that community and making sure that stays core and key when it's going forward. So I think it's a great conversation, and I'm so glad that we had Sophie and Dan and Colonel Cody and his team willing to be part of that.
So as we like to do in every podcast episode, we always want to share a little bit of municipal good news. But before we do, a very important announcement about our upcoming convention.
Oh, yeah, we have to talk about the convention. The convention is October 5th and 6th. So save the date and join us. Sign up on the MIMUN website. It's going to be at the Cross Arena in Bangor. And it's going to be a celebration. I guess we're having Motor Booty Affair show up. And then we're really focused on how to wrap around and embrace and support our municipal employees for the future. So,
yeah, I'm very excited. My very first week on the job was a virtual convention a few years ago. And so I missed Motor Booty Affair.
Well, if you are listening and want to join, Neil and I are also going to have a special podcast interview booth. So please do join us there. Come talk to us. We would love to hear you.
Well, come on out. We'll see you in Bangor, October 5th and 6th. And please stop by the podcast booth.
Yes, we would love to hear from you. So, hey, Neil, what's your municipal good news stories for this week?
I was scanning the news looking for the story that I wanted to present. And most of what I was coming across were postings for upcoming fairs. And I thought it might be nice to just for a few moments highlight the amazing community events that are occurring in the next few months this fall. And it should also be said that many fairs have already come and gone earlier in the summer. I think Mom typically kicks off the season in June. You know, to just recognize the great events that are going on, as well as the sort of stresses that are put on municipalities. I mean, think about how many people come to the Freiburg Fair or the Common Ground Country Fair.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so
But Common Ground certainly has become a much bigger event. And I think the trauma that I had from Common Ground on the first few years that it ran is that you couldn't get coffee because coffee wasn't made in Maine. It was only, or isn't grown in Maine. It is only roasted here. So it took a little while for that to change, I think. I think you can get coffee now, but there were
glad
no
they've come
coffee
around.
beans that were there. That was a struggle for me.
I remember as a young boy, I went to the Waterford's World Fair and truly thought that this was a world fair. The branding of it was perfect.
One of my favorite adult festivals is Pumpkin Fest in Damascotta. Because it mixes that agricultural element with growing giant pumpkins, massive pumpkins that they hollow out and paddle in the river, as well as drop from large heights. It is a joyful, very giddy smash.
It's great that these Maine communities are hosting events really actually year round. A lot of snow bowls and winter fests as well.
Yes.
So it is Acton's Fair going on this weekend. If you're in the Acton area, make it over there.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot all in the first week of September as well. There's Blue Hill and Harmony and Springfield and Clinton and Litchfield, all within that first few days of September, all the way until October. So I guess that's a wrap. Thank you all for listening, and please be sure to listen again next month and see us at convention. This is Neil and Rebecca signing out.